that there are games we wouldn't have won over the last 7-8 years that they will now win.
You know, he might be great at that aspect, you know, but that doesn't mean he's going to be a leader of 53 men.
I don't even know if today he could get on the whiteboard and draw up defensive schemes for you.
You just saw the coaching on display more than anything. We know DK can do that.
When people talk about the DK fade, oh, throw him the ball. That's the DK fade.
The skill set for a coordinator and the skill set for a head coach, there's not as much overlap as people want.
Well, I'm the best corner in the game.
For this run. What a run. Marshawn Lynch. Get off me.
DK.
Yes, sir.
Hey, it's John Schneider with the Seattle Seahawks.
And Washington's got a lead. Leon Washington. Jackson, Smith, and Jimbo. The Seahawks are going to host the NFC Championship.
Every year, the NFL does.
Is it going to be another 9 and 8?
Players
Mike
who've got to finish
Macdonald
something.
Seattle.
They have to fix the offense.
Part of his success and part of
ambition of being the LOB one a year. That's trading DK Metcalf.
Play him aggressive.
This is the Hawks Zone Rundown with Ryan and Bryce.
Guys, welcome back to another episode of the Hawks Zone Rundown. We are live for our preseason roundtable, and we've been looking forward to this show for a while, man, because we have joining us on the roundtable Dan Viens from Seahawks Forever podcast. Dan's been on the show a few times with us, and always love having him on. And Keith Myers joining us again, and Keith also has his own pod, Seahawks Playbook. And guys, welcome to the show. We're going to get into a bunch of stuff. Obviously, preseason's over. 53-man about to be announced this week. We're going to get into our own 53-man. And so everybody that's coming in on the show, just fire away the questions. And in the latter half of the show, we're going to get to, and we're going to do the 53-man. But first off, Dan, Keith, Bryce, what's up? What's going on? How you guys doing?
Just trying to recover from the highest scoring Seahawks preseason game in 7 years from last night. That was fun.
Yeah, recover. That's the right word. Because there was some really good stuff that went on there, and there was some stuff that was harder to watch.
Yeah, let's touch on some of the good stuff real quick. I'm just gonna touch on the offense. Obviously, the starters come out, they play a quarter. Geno Smith, DK, JSN, all on display, and it felt like it was like out of the gate quick, and then they were on the sidelines. DK's got a helmet off, 7-0. Was that a little preview of what's to come, or are we getting a little too excited there with that grub down the field offense there? Dan, what are you thinking?
Well, it was kind of funny because you guys probably saw this too. Brian Baldinger did one of his little breakdowns, his little old school low tech screen shares, and showed the fade to JSN and then the touchdown pass, and said, this is what you can expect to see out of this wide open spread Ryan Grubb offense. And then shortly thereafter, our friend Griffin Sturgeon of the Seattle Overload podcast retweeted it and said, this is a concept that they've been running for a long time. And, so let's pump the brakes on that. But what I do think we can take away from that drive in particular, and also we saw some of this with Sam Howell at the helm too, is I do think, and based on his history, we're going to see a more aggressive offensive approach. There will be more of a concerted effort to get the ball downfield and put pressure on the defense instead of, just sort of acquiescing to the defense sometimes if they think that the matchup's not there. That we saw that too often, I think, in recent years, where they would almost just kind of default to the defense. Well, it's just not there. So let's not force it. Where I think we see this time and time again from the good offenses in the league and some of the elite quarterbacks is you have to keep defenses on their heels, and you have to keep them honest. You have to take shots, especially when you have playmakers like the Seahawks do. So I do think that's a fair takeaway.
Well, and I think one of the things you need to add to that is the fact that on like JSN's fade, he was covered. He was covered well. It didn't matter. DK was covered. It didn't matter. So like if you got playmakers that can do that, you're gonna be more aggressive because you can be, and you don't need a guy wide open in order to throw the ball down the field.
And it was especially good to see that from Geno, given that he hasn't played, and you would expect him to maybe be just a touch hesitant. We saw it on the first throw. It just kind of looked rusty. He sailed it a little bit. The timing wasn't there, but to be able to be as decisive as he was and make those 2 throws to guys that, as you said, Keith, weren't wide open. That's something we haven't seen in the past from some of our other quarterbacks, even the really good ones. So it was refreshing.
Hey, Bryce, I know you were at the game too, but real quick, posing to you too. I mean, wasn't that one of the things we've talked about all season? If he's off season, if he's 1-on-1, 1v1, throw him the football. And they talked about how, they got him that point. And then all of a sudden, 1v1, Geno throws it like Keith just mentioned, wasn't open, but he's a more physical guy. He's got to go up and make that catch, man. What are you thinking?
The things that I liked about that opening drive were, and this is something that I've had a big gripe with probably since DK year 2 he's been here, is they have never focused on getting him the ball early in games. That first throw, even though it was outside and there were some Seahawks fans sitting around me, they're like, oh yeah, typical Geno, like misses. It's like, it wasn't the easiest throw to make. Like, he's trying to layer that in a corner that's basically in cover 2 sitting in the flat and the safety's kind of going over top. The ball wasn't that poorly thrown. Like, yeah, it was a little high, it was a little outside, but that's your first throw in a game since last season when we played our last game versus Arizona for Geno. But the fact that, like, JSN involved quick and early, DK is getting a target right away. Like, I listened to a podcast that Tom Brady did. I think he was on Colin Cowherd's show, and he said, like, when we had top playmakers, we get them the ball early. Like, you cannot ask that dude to keep running his routes and not get him a ball until late in the second quarter, or even sometimes with DK, it was like, oh, is DK even playing? It's the third quarter of the game, and we're finally targeting him.
Yeah.
Those are the things, like Keith alluded to, get your playmakers the ball one-on-one and let them go make plays. DK's touchdown was purely a well-thrown ball by Geno and DK going and making a play. And when people talk about the DK fade, oh, throw him the ball, that's the DK fade, not the 2-yard off the line and let him go get it. That's not something he excels at. Let him run 20 yards into the end zone and go up and get a ball. That's where he's more effective. And, man, like, you're going to add Tyler to this offense and Noah Fant to this offense. But, like, the biggest thing that I noticed watching last night was the formation variety Ryan Grubb puts out there and how simple he makes the reads for the quarterbacks. Like, it's not – I watched Geno do it in his first drive. I watched Sam Howell do it. It's like they get that back foot in the ground and the ball's coming out. They already kind of have an idea where it's going, and it's quick. There's no hesitation on, oh, do I do this or do I do that? And, like, for a guy like even Sam Howell, one of his biggest critics has been the fact that he's poor in decision-making. Sam Howell in the preseason games has looked a lot better in his decision-making, and I think a lot of that goes to Ryan Grubb and, I can't remember the quarterback coach, London, and Jake Peetz's scheme and how they're coaching him up have made Sam Howell look like a upgrade over Drew Lock.
Yeah, I think I saw a stat. I may be getting the tenths of a second wrong, but essentially that every throw except for the one where the pocket was compromised and Geno had to maneuver a little bit and flip it to McIntosh was the ball was out in less than 2.5 seconds, and that was as evidenced by after the game, Mike Macdonald said the plan was to give Geno 2 drives, but we saw what we needed to see.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. They came out and they're like, okay, we're going to get these guys. We're going to run the offense, and they ran 5 plays and all of them were pass plays. That's not them running the offense. That's getting guys reps.
That's getting Geno rep. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's exactly what that was.
Yeah, that was very. There was an intention there, and then and I'd forgotten this because sometimes when you're in the stadium, I mentioned this on my reaction last night. Your reality is a little bit skewed. Because there was one play in particular where McIntosh got another carry, but it was called back by penalty. And so I had forgotten that until I watched the condensed replay again when I got home last night, that the 56-yard touchdown run by McIntosh was the first rush of the game for the Seahawks offense. So it seemed very intentional that they wanted to work on the timing in the pass offense, but also maybe just not show very much on film about this varied running attack that I think Ryan Grubb is going to unleash in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, and also to piggyback off that, no Kenneth Walker, no Charbonnet. So, and we've obviously Kenny Mack's been on display all preseason. He got involved, obviously, like you just mentioned, that little, Gino getting out of the pocket, fighting for his life, and there's Kenny Mack just sitting there. So, and still almost got a first down out of that. So, and we'll talk about the 53 man, but obviously a lot of nice things out of Kenny Mack this preseason, just the way he's running the football. So, yeah, I mean, it's exciting. Anything, I mean, as far as, we talked off air before we came on about the coverage, a lot of guys open, obviously some of these guys aren't going to play, but any concerns, coming out of this game on the defensive side, Keith?
Well, the answer to a couple of the concerns that I had, you had in the second week, you had like DJ James didn't look like he knew how to tackle. And he came out in this game and made some great open field tackles one-on-one. And so I felt a lot better about that from him. And some of that stuff, but really there was just a lot of communication that wasn't happening on the back end. Once you got into the second, third string guys, once it was like Tyakota, I thought had a good game, but his presence when he comes in was kind of when we started to see some of the communication stuff break down. So he might still be playing, but not talking. And but young guys like that, I mean, it takes some time for them. They've got to learn how to handle that. So yeah, I mean, there were some coverage breakdowns, but I wasn't overly concerned just because of who it was. And these aren't our starters. And if some of these guys may play, but it's not going to be all of them. It's going to be like, okay, somebody comes in because somebody, gets hurt and has to rotate out. But you've got one guy out there. Everyone else will be the starters that are talking. So I'm not as concerned as I probably would normally be for giving up that many points.
Yeah, we talked off air before we went live about how there were a couple plays in particular where Kobe Bryant just seemed a little late to react. And keep in mind that this is really his first season playing safety full time. And all of us like his upside there and that, agree that that's a better fit than outside corner in the league. But that, in particular, I saw a lot of blowback on Twitter last night about Nehemiah Pritchett's coverage ability and in particular the long touchdown to Thrash that he was in coverage. But we all agree that when you see the replays, especially from up top, that Bryant misdiagnosed that play. And so, yeah, that's the thing that stood out. Those young guys weren't on the same page. I do take away a couple of things from that though, or add some context to it. Seahawks were only rushing 4. I think pretty exclusively the entire night. And so they weren't, and even with that, they were getting some push on the pocket at times, but the secondary was having to cover quite a bit. And then the other part of that would be that after the game, Reek Woolen doubled down again on something he's been saying all throughout the preseason, that he was asked a question about his man technique and how he's been working on it. And he said, because we're going to play a lot of man. Like he reiterated that. And I think maybe early in the season, if Coach Macdonald is concerned about some of those communication issues and that they're not quite, in sync enough to be able to play some of those more complex zone concepts, maybe they'll lean into that man coverage a little bit, at least early in the season. With other guys too. We're talking Reek and Witherspoon, But I'm so glad I wanted to mention this too. Sorry that I'm glad you brought up DJ James, because one of my favorite takeaways from last night's game is not just him, both those Auburn kids, both of them. They were in coverage on a couple of completions. That's going to be expected from young corners, but both those guys had, I could do a cut up of probably 7 or 8 total plays between the two of them where they're coming up and making really physical run stops on the edge in space, the hardest tackles to make. In one of them, James blew up a screen where he had to shed a couple of blocks. Pritchett did a similar thing. They actually gave James, I think, credit for a sack on one play on the quarterback where he did that. Those guys showed me something last night. And especially coming off, the last couple of years when none of our guys could tackle, that was really, really refreshing to see. And that's how those guys are going to make the team.
Yeah. And it was especially like refreshing to see that because of the fact they didn't make those plays a week ago.
Right.
So like James really struggled in the second preseason game with tackling. He just whiffed on a couple, had bounced off, ball carriers, and it was really kind of ugly. And at that point I was like, okay, this guy's probably headed to the practice squad. But you watch what he did in this last game and hit that physical nature and his ability to come up, take on a block and still make a tackle. that's how you make a team, especially with Michael Jackson being traded and Artie Burns possibly being out with a knee injury. So those guys are going to be probably both on the roster.
Yeah, and it's especially impressive considering neither of them are bigger dudes. Like they're both pretty lightly built. And no, that was fun. That was one of my notes from last night.
One of the things for me that I took away, like I guess we wouldn't call it a negative, but obviously the injuries, Chenna's dirty chop block from Teller there that hopefully is not too significant. The thing for me though was offensive tackles outside of our two guys basically being George Fant right now and Charles Cross really worry me because Fant isn't exactly, injury proof. He's had his fair share of those over his career. I really think there's going to have to be a play in here at some point for, a potential trade to get another veteran tackle in here because McClendon Curtis cannot play tackle, right or left. That was the one thing that came out last night to me. Stone Forsythe looked a little bit better on the right side, but not much, where I think, and we'll get into our projections here shortly, but I don't know if he makes this roster and you don't try and sneak him through to the practice squad as one of your veteran guys and maybe get him through because of the mass that is this waiver claim period. Mike Jarrell looked good again for when he did play later on in that game. He still looked good, but he's developmental, right? Like I couldn't trust if somehow George Fant went down for a week or two that we can put Mike Jarrell out there and he'll hold up. Like the tackle position almost concerns me more in the lack of depth there than the interior of our offensive line, which is kind of a reverse from where it's been for the last little bit of time here, where we've been worried about our depth there. And man, like I know Dan, you and me talked about it before we went into our seats, but if Abe Lucas plays another snap for the Seahawks, it's a bonus at this point. Like I have like just no faith that this guy's going to be able to get on the field. Like he's walking around with no limp, but what's the deal? What is really the holdup here? Is it actually what Pete said it was, and a chronic injury?
Yeah. Yeah. And there are reports that I didn't notice him on the sideline, but that he seems in good spirits for whatever's that worth. He's down there and he's involved and take that for what it, with a grain of salt, I guess. But I did find it interesting to your point last night that they flip-flopped those tackles and played. We've seen Forsythe play right tackle. He did it some last year when Lucas got hurt, but that they moved Curtis and gave him some reps at left tackle too, which I thought was really strange. I mean, he certainly got the length and he can be a dominant presence in the run game. I mean, if that's all you're going to do, I guess he can play tackle, but he got beat again badly. I don't know the player's name on one play last night, just by quickness on the edge, because he just couldn't get out there and mirror the guy. And I didn't have Forsythe in my projection a few days ago, but I almost think at this point you have to keep him because he is a guy that's had reps and he's played both tackles. And, George Fant's had some injury issues. They've really treated him with kid gloves in the preseason. I'd feel better about Stone Forsythe having to play either tackle spot than I would McClendon Curtis right now. I think Curtis makes the team because he can play anywhere, but I think Forsythe does too. And they're just going to have to figure out maybe a way. Maybe they have to keep 10 offensive linemen, whereas sometimes they've gone with 9.
Well, see, one of the things that Bill and I talked about with this was because he's really high on Jarrell. And, there was one point he had, I think after the first 2 preseason games, he had 26 pass blocking snaps and gave up 0 pressures. But he's doing all of that like in the fourth quarter against guys that probably won't be in the NFL, once roster cutdowns are done. So basically it's like, tamp the expectations a little bit. The kid's got physical skills, but yeah, he's a developmental project. If he's your 4th tackle, okay, but going into a season with him as your 3rd is just asking for problems.
You might have to put him on the roster though. A young, physically, athletically gifted guys like him that have that much upside get claimed. It's how the Seahawks got Raekwon O'Neal and McClendon Curtis last year at the cutdown. Like those guys get claimed and stashed on teams that have bigger needs. I kind of think they're going to have to figure out a way to keep him.
I think they keep him. I think you already kind of mentioned it, like with Forsythe making the team, and then Jarrell being the 4th. McClendon Curtis has value because he's also a backup guard, and that is one of those things that you're going to look at and you're going to like, okay, we can he's going to probably make the team too, as a backup guard. So there's that.
Because here's another scenario too. I don't think there's any question Laken Tomlinson's going to be the left guard against Denver. They love him. He's one of the leaders. He's the guy that got the team together pregame yesterday and kind of got the chant going and all of that. And he has, when he's been out there this preseason, he's looked good. He's looked better than he did in New York. But at some point, if Anthony Bradford hangs on to that right guard spot, Christian Haynes is going to push and get that left guard spot. He's looked that good there. If and when that happens, do you keep Laken Tomlinson even on the roster at $3.5 million a year, right? So that it may just be a matter of time before that move with Tomlinson, happens, and unless obviously continues to play at a high level. Just a thought.
Yeah, and going back to your thoughts about Abe, spirits high. That's what they actually showed him. You saw him on TV watching the game too, and yeah, he was out there laughing. But again, it's like the thing that scares us. I know you and Bryce had that combo too. It's just there hasn't been any change in updates. Usually, you're talking about, we think Abe's your best offensive lineman on the team. You think you'd be getting some more detailed updates. And I think at this point, you're a week out. We all know he's going on PUP list, but it's like you said, if he plays a snap, you're just like, wow, this is bonus. So and that scares you, especially going in thinking, this guy was going to be healthy at some point. He still can be, but, again, then, I think we'll have this discussion, but it's, do you start looking at the future beyond Abe? That could be some questions, coming up in the near future, right?
Let me say this, always the, sorry, just real quick, always the eternal optimist here, right? And even though Bryce, you and I talked about maybe never seeing him again last night, I've been thinking about this quite a bit this morning. There were a lot of reports heading into training camp that he was going to be good to go at the beginning of the season and not have to be on the PUP list. Corbin Smith reported that from some inside sources. And so there's obviously been a setback in the timeline. They're not giving us any details. That's just kind of their MO. We're seeing that from Macdonald. He's a lot less forthcoming and optimistic than Carroll was. And sometimes to Carroll's detriment, because we would have expectations that ended up being unrealistic. So the fact that Lucas isn't ready yet, it's been set back a little bit. However, they're not flying him off to see other specialists, having him rechecked, right? You see that a lot of times with injuries like this, where it's not coming along the way they expect it to. And then that's usually bad news. He has to have another procedure. They're not doing that. And so, until we get other news, I do think there is reason for optimism that after the 4 weeks, maybe we'll see him at some point this season. Otherwise, we may, if he's a month behind their timeline that they thought he was going to be on the practice field, but they're not sending him off to see other surgeons or specialists, I can only take that as some sort of good news.
I don't know if he's a month behind where because it was never he's going to be ready for the preseason. He's going to be ready for week 1, we hope. Right? It was always that week 1 was always kind of the that was kind of the goal. And I agree. I think there's been a setback, because if he was truly going to be ready for week 1, he would have come in and started practicing kind of Connor Williams style, right? Where they'd be working him up at this point, and they're not.
Yeah.
But once he hits that setback, he's not going to be ready for week 1. He's probably not going to be ready for week 2. At that point, I think the decision was made. Hey, we're just going to send him to the PUP, which means he's not going to practice, because if he practices, then he's got to go to IR, and there's a whole, thing with the roster as far as getting him on the active roster for 24 hours before you can ship him over there. Otherwise, he can't come back. We know we're going to send him to the PUP, so we're not going to push it. We're going to give him a whole nother month to get right and get in shape and all of that kind of stuff before we have to try and get him on the field. And I think they're just playing it cautiously because they're in a position where they can.
And if that's their approach, then I'm okay with that, because I think it was obvious that he came back too soon last year. Even though when he did hit the field again, you could see the improvement in the offensive line, but he was clearly not 100%. And it was kind of painful to watch. And maybe it even did more damage to the knee having him out there. So if their approach this time is, look, this is a long-term investment. This is a kid that we want to get 100% healthy so he can still be part of our long-term future. Let's do that. I'm all for that, even if there's some struggles in the meantime. What's the deadline for I'm trying to look that up here for when they have to declare PUP for the beginning of the season.
It's cut down time Tuesday. Same as
it is.
Yep, same as all the other cuts and everything. It's
Okay, yeah.
you can
4
only be
Eastern time.
Yeah, you can only be PUP if you are on the off-season PUP list, which basically means you have not practiced. Because as soon as you practice, then you're not eligible for that, and then it becomes an IR situation.
Then I believe, right? Yeah.
Yep. So,
like, that's one of the things I kind of was worried about with Jerome Baker is he's practiced, but he hasn't played. He would have been actually, in theory, almost a prime candidate for a PUP spot at this rate because he's never really been out there. He gets out and then something else is lingering that's an issue. So
he's one of those guys that I would look. He's probably going to make the 53-man roster on Tuesday, but by Wednesday he may be on IR.
Yeah.
And doing that, just all that does is makes them eligible to return. If you just put him straight onto IR without doing the roster shuffle, then you're done. So yeah.
But you can also just leave him on the regular season PUP for 4 games, right? And avoid IR, or is it
for Lucas? You can. For Lucas, you can, but not for Baker. And in fact, the PUP list, you can leave him on there. I believe it's 15 weeks now. You have.
Yeah, it is 15 weeks. You're right.
And that may apply
6, so.
Yeah, that may apply to Artie Burns too, depending on what this injury is, or even Rayshon Jenkins. Well, not Jenkins, but specifically with Burns, where they may have to. He may get cut Tuesday, right? And people might think that that's a bad move because he's been a solid player, but he's probably not going to get claimed on waivers as a vested veteran and also a guy that's hurt, and then you can bring him back after that.
Yeah, just a quick shout to Dave S for a super thanks. Great discussion this morning, gentlemen. So yeah, we're just getting into it, Dave. We appreciate that.
Dave's the best.
Dave is great. So that's awesome. We're gonna dial up the 53-man here in a few minutes. Bryce, I know you're gonna dial that awesome software that you got up there. We're gonna go through it 53-man. This is Bryce and I talked about this on a couple of pods, leading up to this, that there's going to be some hard cuts that these guys have. You look how deep a lot of these rooms are. Corners. You just mentioned Artie Burns. It feels like one of those years where there's going to be a lot of tough decisions. We're going to get into the 53-man here because we can keep going on about it, but even running backs, you keep 4. And if you don't, can you slide Halani on the practice squad? Because, you probably can't with Kenny. And, it's just going to be so many decisions. How many times where you're watching all preseason to your backup backs just going at it, playing great, stuff like that. It just seems like I can't remember the last time where we've had this many hard decisions on cut day. Dan, what do you think?
No, I think it speaks to the depth of the roster and the young talent in particular at, some of it at positions of, that are desired. I said this a couple of days ago, these cuts aren't always about the 53 best players. And that's what some fans forget. And there's going to be some overreaction between now and Tuesday to some of the names that are announced, but keep in mind that I think John Fraley posted a graph earlier today on this from Field Goals about how really on a percentage basis, very few players are claimed on this mass cut now, since there's only one, and teams tend to want to keep their own developmental players that are familiar with the organization. They're familiar with them. It happens, but it's not widespread. And so John Schneider's probably as good as anyone in the league at having his finger on the pulse and knowing kind of which guys they may be able to sneak through and which guys they can't. And Macdonald sort of hinted last night when asked about how hard this day was going to be that, they have to keep their eye on the big picture and it's about being developmental. And so that's why I've had a lot of people, maybe you guys have too, tell me that DJ James should be cut because they've seen a couple bad reps on tape and Artie Burns is better. Well, as I've already mentioned, Burns is going to make it through waivers.
Yeah.
And plus he's a vested veteran, so to keep him on the roster, you have to guarantee his. Yeah.
Especially now that he's hurt, he's going to,
But James isn't, a young corner that was projected by some as a 3rd or 4th round grade we get in the 5th. There's no way that guy makes it through waivers to your practice squad. It's not that simple. So some of the 53 is about protecting your core and the guys you want to move forward with. And then there's a lot of shuffling after that, because I think we've seen it in the last week with the 2 trades. This isn't going to be anything like 2010, 2011, but I think Schneider's out there, maybe more so than the last few years, aggressively, and his staff looking at waiver wires and looking for guys that fit what Macdonald wants to do, fit this defense. Maybe you get a kind of a sneaky little gem on the offensive line. They're going to be looking, and maybe now more than ever, if Nwosu's out for any length of time, they may be looking for an edge player. Certainly they're looking for another defensive tackle that can play more inside and a nose tackle. Brady Henderson has talked about that a lot this week. So I think there could be more changes between now and a week from now than we've seen in the last few years.
Yeah, and you made a good point there about it's about protecting guys and that kind of stuff. One of the things that when Bill and I do, we do roster projections and stuff throughout the offseason, and you look at Cody White has had a tremendous camp. I know he had that big touchdown that was called back. He hasn't really shown up in the preseason quite as much, but in camp he's looked really, really good. But he's a guy that can get through to the practice squad. He may have earned himself a roster spot with his with his play and having a good camp, but that doesn't mean he gets it, because he can get to the practice squad where Derek Young or D. Eskridge probably can't. Those guys are much more likely to be claimed.
And we know this because Cody White's made it through waivers about 20 times already in his career in this league. So,
yeah,
it's when we get the roster up, it'll be interesting to talk about the receiver position, because I think that might be the most intriguing.
Yeah.
All right. So speaking of that, I will throw that up actually, Dan, now that you've asked for it.
Here's a question I have for you guys about a quarterback, though. I do feel like this regime and this coaching staff now, unlike what we saw a lot under Pete Carroll, places a little more value on a third quarterback, albeit he's not going to be on the 53, he'll be on the practice squad. Do you think they're out looking for an upgrade over PJ Walker when guys are cut?
I do.
Yeah, I do. And they're looking for a younger guy and an upgrade, because Walker has shown throughout the preseason he's just not. He's not the guy. Yeah. Like, you can go and you're looking at a practice squad guy that probably won't play at all. And if he does, it won't be, until later in the season. So you have time to bring him along. They're going to go get a guy with more talent. They're going to get a guy that has more promise.
Because there aren't many teams. Seahawks are one of the only teams in the league that carry only 3 quarterbacks during the preseason. Like, a lot of them have 4 and 5, and we saw it last night. Like one or two of those guys, like the Browns are shopping those guys, and they all had their moments. I mean, I don't think they're trading Dorian Thompson-Robinson. I think he's a guy they want to develop. But I think certainly Tyler Huntley might be available. They're going to have to cut some of those guys. Yeah, some of these teams have 4 or 5 guys in camp.
I think Tyler Huntley's the guy. The other guy, I know I would like here.
Macdonald knows Huntley.
If he gets cut, would be great, is Jake Haener from New Orleans. He has familiarity with Ryan Grubb's system. He has talent, and he's a young guy you could develop. And with Spencer Rattler down there.
Did you see what Rattler did today?
Yeah, exactly my point. I think,
played him.
You know what? Is it crazy to think, and I'll throw this out, I know it's a little off the Seahawks, but could Minnesota turn around and go to New Orleans and call about Derek Carr?
I think they feel good enough about Sam Darnold. I think Kevin O'Connell likes Sam Darnold a lot.
For now, but if you have the talent, which Minnesota's got a pretty good roster, like, you could call about Derek Carr, I think, in New Orleans, and I think New Orleans would listen. Because of his cap hit, because of what you've seen from Rattler. If things don't start the first...
Yeah, if they go 1 and 5 out of the gate, I could maybe see something like that. Sure.
Yeah. All right, so we picked Geno and Sam. I think we're all in agreement of that. If anyone wants PJ Walker on this roster, I don't know what to say about that, but we'll move to the receiver position. I'll put our main guys we know are making this, the top 4. So DK, Tyler, JSN, Jake Bobo. Now, what is the agreement on how many receivers we're keeping? And just so you know, D. Williams is listed as a receiver on this, but we know he's a corner and a returner.
He's a corner, yeah.
So we can keep him till the end when we start building this all out and decide if he makes it as a corner. I think Laviska Shenault's the 5th. I think he's locked a spot.
I think he's
that's done. That's absolutely done. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think they ultimately end up with 6 on game days. But I don't know that they'll start with 6 on the 53. They may have to protect another position. And I think all the rest of the guys on this list are pretty safe to get through to the practice squad. I mean, maybe a team sees some upside in Derek Young, but you look around the league, and for the most part, teams all have 8 or 9, receivers on their rosters right now. They have their guys that they like. They're in the system already. I don't know that. Do any of us think Young presents enough upside that another team is going to go out and give him a 53-man roster spot to protect? I don't know. But even if you try that and you lose him, is it a big deal? Because we've seen what Aesop Winston has done, and we like Cody White. So I tend to think that by Tuesday, there's only going to be 5 on the initial 53.
So you got D. Eskridge getting cut.
I do. It's hard because last night was so dynamic and we finally got to see it. And you saw how his teammates felt about him. I just look at his usage. It seemed like they really want D. Williams to be the main returner. And there are some people out there, Corbin Smith's one of them, who thinks he has a 53-man roster spot, even though that's all he does. I haven't seen enough from him in the passing game yet to think that that's a role that they see for him, unless they just think he's that guy as a returner and that he presents more value than Williams would.
I've never had D. Eskridge on this upcoming roster until last night when he broke that. And now you have to look and go, just the way his teammates reacted for him. Like they love him. And it would be hard to have him have that moment, that success, and then turn around and tell all those guys that were like, there for him and pounding the table for him that, he didn't make it.
If this was the previous regime and everything happened the same way, I would say, because there was an investment there in him, but I don't think anyone has that free pass this year. So I don't know. I'm rooting for the kid. I know there's people that want to give up on him because of the injury history and the off-field incident that he had, but let's not talk about Creed Humphrey. Okay. But I liked this kid. I liked this kid coming out of the Senior Bowl. I hated that we took him instead of Humphrey, but I didn't hate him as a pick, if that makes any sense. Mm-hmm. And I've never seen him as who's the running back out of Notre Dame that could never stay healthy?
Pro-size.
Yes. Pro-size. I never saw Eskridge as that kind of guy. I just kind of thought he got nicked up and had some bad luck. I always saw the potential there.
I think you can sneak.
We lost you, Bryce.
So since Bryce he's
thinking about
since Bryce is frozen, did you guys see the thing somebody
I don't see enough
on Twitter that was
from D. Eskridge to warrant? Oh, we having issues here.
You were frozen.
Yeah, having issues.
Anyway, so the thing on Twitter that was it was like career punt returns for a touchdown. D. Eskridge 1, Creed Humphrey 0.
Creed Humphrey 0. We won that draft. That was a great stat of the day.
If I gotta ask you this: if went 6, is Derek on there for user 6? Like if they do go 6, is that because you heard about Mike raving about him too?
That's why I was going to say maybe, because Mike said some things about him last night.
And he's a talented big body receiver, right? That's where I'm looking at. Like when I look at Aesop, to me, it's like, he's been around here before, but also the fact that, he's a smaller guy. We have 2 smaller receivers, obviously with more talent, right? JSN Tyler on the smaller end, where Derek's this big physical, DK size, not this, nobody's like DK, but just he's a bigger dude, right? And he brings a lot of that skill set too, which is nice. And obviously what Mike said, right? That obviously you guys heard about. So
yeah, Macdonald plays things close to the vest, but I was surprised when I watched that post-game presser that how definitive he was about how he felt about Young. That kind of said something. Whereas you compare and contrast that with his comments about Jamie Sheriff, right? Which all the 12s want him on the roster, especially with Nwosu being banged up. Like if you don't even have to read between the lines. Like Macdonald essentially came out last night and said, proud of the kid. He should be proud, but he ain't making this roster. We're hoping he gets to the practice squad. Like he may as well have just come out and said that. So that's why what he said about Young last night gave me pause.
Well, the thing is that what Young does is it's not just his, what he offers to the offense, but he is a special team standout as a guy that covers punts and covers kicks and does that. I mean, he's got 4.4 speed and he's 6'2", 220. You just don't find that size speed combination very often. It was to the point where the previous coaching staff had packages for him built where he was going to be a fullback and an H-back, and they were going to move him around and try and get him on the field. And then, of course, he got hurt in camp, and all of that got thrown out the window. But if the sixth guy makes the team, I'm almost certain it's Derek Young.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say too. Sorry, guys, that was a tech issue. But yeah, Derek Young's the one I was going to say out of that group that I think makes it as a sixth, just because how Mike Macdonald has talked about him. Right? And
Bryce, also, Bryce, I got to ask you this too. I mean, don't you think too, just that how we, when you look at Aesop, I know you like him and stuff like that, but, we already have those smaller kind of guys, like Tyler's a small receiver, JSN's a smaller, obviously these guys present a lot more talent. So if you're going to take a six, I mean, without Mike's comments, if you just look at him as a receiver, if you think that's why he'll be it. But I like like Keith mentioned, you don't find guys with 4.4 that big, that physical.
You don't. And the special teams factor with Derek Young, like he's a great gunner. Like he'll run down and cover, and he gives you some of that as your sixth guy. That's what you want. You want a guy that you can plug into a special team spot if you need to. The thing, though, that was really interesting for me, and it has been kind of through this whole offseason, training camp, preseason, is how little Tyler Lockett has actually done. Like, it has really kind of stood out to me. Like, yeah, he went through warm-ups. Apparently, he's dealing with some sort of leg issue. I noticed his sleeve's been back on his leg at practices and stuff when he's out there, when he is doing stuff. Like, it's really screaming to me that this is probably Tyler's last year, plus his cap hit next year for Seattle. Like, he won't be on the roster next year. So yeah, I think if you do take a six, it's Derek Young, just because he gives you some versatility in the offensive receiving core. If Tyler does miss time, JSN rolls into Tyler's spot. Bobo's now your third. Chenault gives you a little bit of a different, and then Derek gives you a little bit of something different. So it gives you more variety. But right now, we'll just go with the 5. If we have still some numbers, we can come back and put Derek Young in. So now we'll move over to running back. Now, are we taking 3 or 4 running backs, guys? Because I'll put the 2 on that we know are making this roster.
How healthy is Charbonnet? That's the question.
That's a good question.
Because if he is, they just held him out, for precautionary reasons, and he's going to be fine. The 3 is an option, but if he's banged up and possibly going to miss week 1, they'll keep 4. They'll just have him on the roster and have him ready.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting and a little disappointing that nobody asked Macdonald point blank about Charbonnet last night, because they were throwing all these injury questions at him, and he was answering them pretty straightforward. On my roster projection 5 days ago, I had him keeping only 3, but after last night, I think you have to keep 4. I mean, you can't. I don't think George Talon. First of all, Kenny McIntosh has absolutely established himself as the third guy. Like, my concerns about what they were saying about him in pass protection is what led me to wonder if maybe Helani had gotten the edge on him. But when you see how they used him, even in situational stuff in those joint practices against the Titans, let you know where he was on the depth chart, but also just last night solidified it. And he's just such a talented runner. But then you also saw it from Helani. I don't think Helani makes it through waivers. I think that he was going to get drafted if it wasn't for the injury issues at Boise State, and he showed everything. When you draft or sign prospects out of college, what you want to see is the skills that they present on tape in college carry over to the league. And on that one run that got him to the 1 before they gave it to him to finish off the drive, he showed off everything that his scouting report raves about. I mean, physicality, vision, lateral ability, quickness, strength, physicality. I think they love him. I think there was a reason they targeted him in undrafted free agency, and I think they keep 4. And which is, now this gets tricky, right? And this is why maybe they only keep 5 receivers to start, because if you keep keeping that extra guy because we like him, you have to rob Peter to pay Paul at some point, right?
No, that's fair. So we're gonna go with 4 here: George Helani and Kenny McIntosh.
Yeah,
I think you have to.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and then we may, when it's all said and done, have to go back and rethink this. But shout out to the guys at 12 Talk, because they sent this to me, and I never dove into it the way that you are, and now I'm kicking myself for it. This is a beautiful tool
That's
Oh,
awesome.
it's phenomenal. I absolutely love it. It's great. It allows you to kind of play and match make and do what you want. So, okay, tight end.
I would
So
pay for this, and you can tell the guys that if they're watching now, send me an invoice. I'll pay for it.
Noah Fant, Pharaoh Brown, I think is going to be ready by week 1. At least his videos that he's posted, he's moving now. The swelling seems to have gone down in his foot.
Yeah.
I think there's a good chance Pharaoh Brown's on the roster. Whether he plays a bunch in week 1 is kind of up in the air. So are we now? AJ Barner and Brady Russell. I don't see a way Barner's not on here. Kind of what you were talking about with the corners earlier there, Dan, about James and Pritchett. He was the youngest guy at his position in the draft. And if you cut him, he's gone. Nobody's going to let him sneak through the waivers.
Not the way he's shown. Yeah, not the way he's shown to be in the blocking game. And that's the thing. You know, Pharaoh Brown's on a 1-year deal, and Barner
may have future blocker.
He may have some limitations in the passing game. He's not a dynamic athlete, but he's so good, and he's shown it even at his age already in line, that I think he's your Pharaoh Brown next year and moving forward. Got to protect him.
Yeah.
Now,
Brady Russell made. How could he?
No.
If you cut Brady Russell after everything he's done, I mean, the dude has shown up every day at camp. He's shown up in all 3 preseason games. Like, if you cut him, like, how do you go into a locker room and tell the guys, look at the guys there and be like, yeah, he didn't do enough.
It's really funny you say that though, Keith, because it gives me flashbacks. If that were to happen, of Kason Williams.
Oh God. Yeah.
But Williams was a guy that was just so limited athletically, but he made a bunch of plays. I know he made a bunch of 50-50 balls, and but
you remember how the team responded though. There were guys that came out, Sherman and other guys going, how did he not make our roster? And we kept so and so over top. And like he's talking about, like, how did Pete Carroll walk back in? And I think that might have been part of the decay at that point, or starting to decay more, because I was post the Super Bowl loss. Yeah, you had that, and it just truly started to erode at that. Always compete, give that guy a chance. So I agree, Brady Russell's made this, and the other reason I think Brady Russell's unique in this is because of this guy's injury. Brady Russell gives a lot to Ryan Grubb that Jack Westover gave him at UW. His versatility to play a little bit in the slot, block, do kind of the H-back role. So I think Brady Russell makes it, and I think actually Jack Westover gets snuck through to practice squad, or maybe he gets an injury settlement depending on what the severity of his injury is, but I think he probably makes it on the practice squad as your new Tyler Mayberry type tight end, because I don't think Mayberry makes it going this year into the practice squad.
I think Brady Russell's, plain and simple, one of the biggest stories of the preseason. I really do. And he's not. I expected him to contribute in the passing game. That's what I liked, what I saw on tape when they got him early last year. Another guy that they poached off a practice squad after the initial cuts. But I didn't expect him to be the all-around tight end that he is. He's a solid blocker too, and we've seen it in the run game even. Like he's one of the stories of camp to me. It's a really cool way, and it just speaks to how many different ways you build a roster. When you look at guys like him and Curtis, and O'Neill's not going to make the roster, but he was a guy that, that was acquired in the same way, and Drake Thomas, where you comb through these waiver wires and you find guys that you can poach if you can give them a roster spot. And what a revelation he's been.
Okay, so now we're on to the O-line. So I'm going to click through the guys that we are almost certain are going to be no matter what on this O-line, just to speed this up. So Bradford, Connor Williams, Charles Cross, Abe Lucas, Lincoln Tomlinson, Christian Haynes, Olu, and George Fant. There we go. Okay, so I'm counting Abe on this. When we get back, and probably come back to this later, he's going to be on PUP. We all agree on that. He's not going to be playing the first 4 games potentially. Like he said, it was a hope he's ready for week 1. We kind of think it's probably not going to be that case.
Yeah.
So one guy I want to kind of bring up that I've been very impressed with, and I think because of Connor Williams' situation, there's no guarantee he even starts game 1, even though they're hoping he's ramped up in time. He's coming off an injury. I like Jalen Sundell as a center tackle flexibility initially to make it, because I don't know, like you can go off PFF and he's had some really good grades, but he's a guy that I think could be a developmental project at center if Olu doesn't work out, because he also shares similar scores. We talk about RAS scores to Connor Williams. They're almost identical. I've really been impressed with him.
No one's gonna poach him. He can get to the practice squad. That would be my thoughts on him. I'm looking at this going, who do we know can't get through?
Okay, so guys I don't think can get through. I think Mike Jarrell, someone would potentially poach him, actually, is one guy because of his skill set and where he's tested as a tackle.
Yeah.
So I'll put Mike Jarrell on. Now, you got Lamea, who is a fourth or fifth round pick. And a lot of teams seem to have liked him coming out.
Fifth rounder. Yeah.
Fifth rounder, Forsyth. I like Greenfield, but I think you can sneak him through the practice squad and McClendon Curtis.
We talked a little bit about this before we went live. I think Curtis is a lock because A, how they feel about him and what they've said about him, and B, that he can play guard and tackle. And we all agree that he's better as a guard, but he can play all four non-center spots, either side. Even if we didn't really get an explanation of this last night, but they flipped him over and had Forsyth playing right tackle and Curtis playing left. So I think he's on the roster. And the guy that I've changed my mind about is Forsyth. I thought he was expendable because of all this young depth, but I think he's a guy that until you know about Abe Lucas, given the fact that George Fant is 32 and they've had to hold him out of a bunch of practices already this preseason to try to preserve him, that you need to, I trust Stone Forsyth more than I trust these other guys if we had to go to another starter. And what if something happens to Charles Cross? Yeah. Forsyth is a natural left tackle. He would be my preferred choice on the left side, unless you had someone, unless maybe now, if you want to get really far-fetched, maybe George Fant can play left tackle. And if Mike Jarrell at some point is ready to play, then that could be another option. But that's a stretch. I think you keep both Curtis and Forsyth. And if that gives you 10, that may seem a little high. However,
that'd be 11 actually.
Would that be 11, including Lucas?
Lucas is out.
I'm not including.
Because Lucas doesn't count against the roster if he's on the pup. You don't even have to do the 24-hour thing. So
if it gives you 10, that gives you 25 on offense, which is an even split. Now, teams don't necessarily do that. You may keep more on defense and offense, but I think 10, given all the questions, makes sense. And Lamea, I like, but I'm not worried about him getting through waivers. He hasn't really shown a lot of good reps. But he's also a guy. I think he's a 4-man for McClendon Curtis. Yeah.
Lamea should have been being their developmental center. They should have moved him to center and had him working out there from day one. He has the full profile of a legit center. And I have been kind of disappointed that they haven't even tried him there. He's just been a guard.
It's the only position he hasn't played, so at some point you might as well try him there. That leads me to another point, though, that I don't think we've talked much about. What if long-term Anthony Bradford grabs that right guard spot and holds on to it? Because he seems to get better every week. I thought he had some good pass pro reps last night, and he's a mauler in the run game. I've seen him block two guys on one play. I've seen him block guys with one arm. He's so strong. And let's say a guy like Lamea or McClendon Curtis, who has played some left guard also, they've played him on both sides, ends up being the long-term guy there. I know I'm getting ahead of myself. Christian Haynes played center at the Senior Bowl.
Yeah.
And there was some
that can play center.
There was some thought coming out of Connecticut he could be a better center than guard, and some teams may view him as that. I'm just saying long-term, if Connor Williams has a good season, goes and prices himself out of your salary cap this offseason as a free agent, that could be another option.
And then, but my only caveat to that, Dan, is then who's our left guard for the future? Because Lincoln Tomlinson is not.
Well, that's what I'm saying. One of the other guys like Curtis or Lamea would have to convince them. I'm just that would have to be part of this.
The thing for me with Lamea, and this is the only kind of caveat I have with him, is I think a lot of teams were high on him, and I don't think he'll make it to the practice squad. I think even though he hasn't put much up, I think someone will just take that kind of risk on a 5th round guy. The other thing is we talk about Mike Macdonald's kind of eye for linebackers, right? And his ability to take Tyrese Knight. If you listen to Scott Huff, and when he talks about Lamea, he wanted Lamea at UW. Like you can hear it in that kind of video that the Seahawks always put out. And he's like, I finally got you. I can't wait to have you and work with you. Like, I think he was Scott Huff's like kind of pick. Like he really wanted him. So that's why I wonder if he doesn't make it. We'll go without him for right now, but I wonder if LeMay is kind of that wild card if he doesn't make it over like someone else that we kind of think should be there, but they want to go with the younger piece because of these reasons of Scott Huff's.
Well, and I'll say one last thing on this position group. If between now and Tuesday, they don't keep Jarrell and or Forsyth, that could tip their hand about their optimism with Abe Lucas.
True.
Right? If they think, okay, starts the season on the pup, but he's going to be ready by week 5 or 6. So we can try to get by this early part of the schedule, which is a little bit more favorable, and protect one of these young guys that we want for the future. To Macdonald's comment last night, right? That could give us a little bit of a hint. But if they keep both those guys, if they do this, like we're talking about, that probably doesn't bode well for Lucas playing in the first half of the season.
And so for our listeners and viewers, Lucas is sitting up here because we're counting him on the pup list at this point during roster construction. All right, so now let's head over to the defensive side. Okay, so linebackers are all bunched into one, edge and inside. So let's start with our edge guys. So Chenna, Derek Hall, Boy Mafe are the 3 main guys. Draymond Jones has been playing some reps there in practice and whatnot. Mike Morris has taken reps on the outside there as well. Do we see Jamie Sheriff or one of these other guys, Nelson Caesar, Anderson, making this roster? I don't see any of them making it. Like, I know Jamie Sheriff's had a really good preseason, but he's been playing against 3s and 4s.
When they traded Darrell Taylor, and then I saw Sheriff play last night, I thought, well, maybe that's the call. And then Macdonald got up to the podium and talked about him, and I'm like, yeah, he's cut.
He essentially, what he did in his press conference was basically just give him a big pat on the back.
Hey, good job, buddy.
And an orange slice. He was like, excellent. We'll see you hopefully. Now he could, if he gets through the practice squad, and you would think he would. He was a street free agent 3 weeks ago. He's working for Southern Wine and Beverage in Georgia, I think. That speaks usually to lack of demand from teams all around the league. Those opinions can change based on the reps he's put on tape, but you put him on the practice squad, he can be a game day elevation for as long as Nwosu's out. So, I mean, they can do things like that and sort of you almost buy yourself an extra roster spot. But based on those comments, I don't think he makes the team.
So these are the 3 edges I'll stay, and we're counting when we put in on the D-line, Morris and Draymond will also get reps at those spots.
Yeah.
So Tyrell Dotson, Jerome Baker for inside, and Tyrese Knight. I think, and I'm going to put this out here, because of watching that game and when the second group came on the field, who was wearing the green dot with Tyrese Knight, which I found kind of rather interesting, was Drake Thomas.
Yeah, I did find that interesting.
You pointed that out to me, yeah.
Because I did not expect that, because John Radigan had the green dot in the first preseason game, and I think he had it with the second unit in the second preseason game. I was a little surprised that it was Thomas and not like Patrick O'Connell. But yeah, that is interesting. It's very interesting.
And the fact for me is that he ran the first set of second team. Like when the first defense came out and they went to that second group, Drake Thomas was out there before Radigan or O'Connell, which I was like, really? Like, cause I was trying to figure out who the hell's 42. I was like,
right.
Who's 42? I don't remember, because I haven't seen him for so long. I was like, and I'm like looking. And I finally, I'm like, that's Drake Thomas. What in the? I'm like, I didn't even know he was playing tonight for one. So I think Drake Thomas might have endeared himself somehow to this coaching staff in a way that we're not aware of, because we haven't seen him. But for a guy that basically just came off of the pup list 2 weeks ago, just before the Titans joint practices, to now, hey, you're the second linebacker with the green dot of all things, not a guy that's been there the entire camp and practicing. I think Drake Thomas makes this 53 for whatever reason, his special teams versatility. And the other thing for me is his coverage. He is good in coverage as a coverage linebacker with Dotson and that style, that I think maybe that's what they like about him. And the Raiders were not happy to lose him last year when we poached him off of their practice squad.
He's such an interesting case because, I loved when we got him from the Raiders last year. He was a really under the radar guy that I liked coming out in the draft. I just loved his run fits and his discipline and his eyes. And he's an undersized guy, though. He's an undersized Mike. And then he had that knee injury late in the year, and we never got any clarification on it. It was just a mystery. Even Corbin Smith said he couldn't get any information. He thought maybe it was a patella tendon injury, and those take longer. And then all of a sudden, he was back on the practice field with no warning. No one had ever asked Macdonald about him or anything. And then he was out there with the green dot last night. Here's where I've come to land on this inside linebacker situation. Thomas, to me, is a little redundant physically and style-wise with Terrell Dodson. I think the acquisition of Michael Barrett this week makes Thomas expendable. I think they're also an undersized guy, a little bit of a similar skill set, but I think a guy with a higher ceiling, and he just didn't get here in time. He played some reps on special teams last night, which is kind of cool. He was out there leading the way on D. Eskridge's punt return touchdown, right?
Yep.
But Barrett's a guy that, we've talked about a little bit yesterday. We all like. I think he's on the 53, and maybe Thomas is the fifth guy, but I kind of think Radigan's out. The fact he had the green dot taken away from him, the fact that Barrett is known as a special teams demon in addition to what he can do on the field, and that was kind of Radigan's role. The fact that Radigan would be a $3.5 million cap hit if he's on this roster, that you can save a couple million by cutting him. You would still get him back on the practice squad. I don't think there's any chance you would lose him to another organization. I know they like him, but that's kind of where I'm leaning now, is that Barrett's on this roster. They acquired him for a reason, and that Radigan might be out and Thomas might be a wild card if they keep 5.
Now we go to our conversation. DJ James and Pritchett, are they on the 53 initially?
Jeremiah Pritchett is. I don't think that is in. I don't think that's something that we need to debate. Like, he's been kind of that guy. I think DJ James has been up and down, and there's some talk. There's a conversation to be had there, but Pritchett's always been the better of the two.
Right. Okay. Kobe Bryant's listed as a corner, but he is strictly a safety. We know that. So he'll be added in this group, but he'll count in the safety. So we may have less safeties over here. Artie Burns, we figure, could have been, if he was healthy, cut, re-signed week 2 potentially. So his cap hit doesn't count. Like, if he's cut later on in the season. I think Lance Boykin, I think he's a practice squad guy. He shows some things, and then he obviously had the bonehead decision last night. The other one that I wonder goes in this group, he's listed as a receiver, is D. Williams.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Because he was the number 1 kick returner last night, basically, and punt returner. Like, they had him out there for everything with the starting groups. He also does, and this is the one thing I mentioned this to Dan before our game, the game that we were at. He gives you some receiver versatility too, as a spot guy in a pinch if you needed to put in a receiver, because he's played the position in college. So you kind of get a 2-for-1 there with D. Williams, where if you bring him in as a corner and a specialist in the return game, and say, I don't know, Laviska Shenault gets hurt or something, he can always flip over to that receiver position for a game if you need him to.
Williams is a guy that I've just had a hard time buying on the 53, but there's so many people out there that cover the team that are convinced that the team is almost committed to him in a way to be the returner, that maybe we need to think about the roster a little bit differently with these new kickoff rules. That when you look at the specialists, and you have Jason Myers, Michael Dixon, and Chris Stoll, maybe just, you have a 4th spot there, and not worry so much about how he impacts the other position groups. He's your return guy. He has shown some cool things in coverage, right? Mm-hmm. But even though mostly on the outside, like if he could play slot, and you would think at his size he would project to that, then maybe that would impact the James decision. The James thing is interesting to me because of this. He did play some outside in college, but I don't think that's his spot here. If we were sure that Devin Witherspoon was going to primarily play in the slot, then I would say maybe James is expendable. They could risk trying to pass him through waivers. when you're thinking about the future, right? If you want to have a slot guy. But Witherspoon played exclusively outside last night. And I know it was only for a couple of series, but we don't know what the plan is with him yet. And so I do think Artie Burns at some point is on the 53, whether it's initially or it's a little bit later. So as much as I hate the idea of potentially exposing James, he's probably a replaceable player. And maybe they do feel strongly enough about Williams' returnability that they just have to protect him somehow.
Okay. So are we going to leave Burns and James both off this right now and then just add Williams in the receiver bracket, but he goes under corner to give us 5?
That gives us 5. I think one way or another, they keep 5.
Yeah.
I think they keep 5 that can play the position. So I think either Burns or James is on the roster, one way or the other.
Keith, who are you going for? Vote here.
It's not going to be Artie Burns. I might have been until he got hurt, and that was a non-contact injury, which scares me. I'm thinking he may end up on IR, which would make it DJ James. But the D Williams part makes it hard. It really does, because he has shown some nice things in coverage, and he's there to be special teams, but he's also played well in coverage. So, he makes it harder.
Yeah.
Okay, I'd say DJ James. I put Kobe Bryant in because he's going to be in the safety conversation, and I think he's probably going to be. He's your number 2 free right now currently. So, safety-wise, Julian Love, Rayshon Jenkins, Kayvon Wallace. Now, Jarek Reed, have we heard anything? Because he didn't dress or nothing. Is he still pup, basically?
He's still pup. He's still pup.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, so he's still on the pup. So really it becomes your Kobe Bryant fits into here as your 4th. I think Marquise Blair, you can sneak through to practice squad as one of your veteran practice squad guys.
Easily.
Ty Okada is the one that's kind of interesting to me. He's played well, but I don't know if he warrants a 53-man spot.
I don't think he makes it.
I think he can get through to the practice squad.
Yeah. So this is basically our safety room. Kobe Bryant counts in here. Okay. So now this is D line. So I will put everyone that we know is going to be on this D line: Murphy, Williams, Draymond, Jaron Reed, John Hankins, and Mike Morris. Okay. Cameron Young's still on pup because for whatever reason, there's something going on there with him. And I wonder if he maybe, depending if they sign a D tackle in this waiver period, that's a guy that could potentially play, like not like, oh, we're signing a project guy, like a guy that can come in and take some meaningful snaps with Hankins in there. I wonder if Cameron Young doesn't end up on, like what Keith said, like season end IR, just to protect him going forward. That's what I'm starting to think. That's because he's been, they haven't said a peep about him since Mike Macdonald came and said, oh yeah, he's about a week away. And then we haven't heard a single peep about him.
Right.
So, one guy. Sorry, go ahead, Dan.
I was going to say none of those other undrafted guys have really stood out. But Miles Adams, especially against the Titans, played the entire game. He's had his moments, but he played mostly on the interior. Mostly played nose against the Titans because they just didn't have anyone else, and was surprisingly good. Now he's nicked up. I think he gets claimed if you waive him. I think he's on the roster for now, but they go out. I think they acquire another defensive tackle in the next 4 or 5 days, and maybe Adams is the guy that's expendable.
Okay. So do we put Adams on for now, I guess?
Yeah, but it's going to be someone else.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like that's what I would do. They're going to acquire someone else. Brady
so
Henderson.
I'll do this then. I'll just throw one of these guys on as a gap player.
Kind of a placeholder. Yeah.
Yeah, placeholder.
Okay, what does that do for our numbers so far?
We're at 49 out of 53 right now, but we still have.
You got to do
we have 3 specialists.
Yeah,
so that
3 specialists
leaves us
and
one
then,
spot.
Leaves us one spot.
Oh.
And that leaves us
the
probably
one
D
spot
Williams.
is D Williams.
So you take him.
And that's again.
We got 5 receivers.
That's with 5 receivers.
That's with 5 receivers. So so that means
you can always elevate somebody. Yeah, you can always elevate someone from the practice squad. And I think a bunch of those guys, if not all of them, maybe Tariq Young gets claimed. But are you really? I
still think Tariq makes this 53. I mean, that's just me. Like when the real 53 comes
he
out,
might.
I think you're going to see his name on there. So, I mean,
It's
But
going
if
to
he
depend, I
does-
think, on injuries. I think it depends on what happens with Chenna. If he goes to short-term IR.
well, if he doesn't, for sure. But I think if he doesn't, I don't know. I just think, I mean, yeah, do they carry 6? Or, you know, do you guys think they only carry 5 receivers?
I don't know. I find it
go ahead,
interesting that I think we tend to agree on just about everything. I think this entire 53-man roster comes down to one spot that we're not sure of, and it's D. Williams.
I mean, there's you got to look at this. I mean, if Pharaoh Brown ends up on short-term IR with his foot, then Tariq Young, I think, is the next guy guy on at wide receiver, or you know, that kind of stuff. Or if you know, they do something a little different on the offensive line than we're expecting, and they keep 9 instead of 10. And they let a guy like Stone Forsythe go because they're okay with McLennan Curtis backing up both sides. Then you that's another way to get Tariq Young onto this roster. One of those type of situations could easily happen, and he's really, in my mind, looking at all of this, he's the 54th guy on a 53-man roster, which makes it hard because I think he's good enough to make this roster. I think he should be on this roster, but things have not broken his way in terms of, you know, the tight end injuries and the offensive line stuff, and it's those kind of things make it harder on, you know, guys at the back end of the roster to hold on to their spot.
Yeah.
The one thing I'll say too is keeping 5 right now the way that it is, basically D. Williams is a corner in this. Ryan Grubb's offense uses a lot of tight ends split out. Like Noah Fant's going to be more of a receiving threat than he truly is a tight end. Tight end is what we've known to see them in Seattle's offense with Waldron and Brian Schottenheimer. Like, I think you're going to see Noah Fant's target and receptions increase this year compared to the last few years. So when they go to 4 receiver set, it might be DK, Tyler, JSN, and Noah Fant. And or if they go to 5 receiver, you're throwing Bobo out there and Noah Fant. Like, it's not a true 5 receiver set. Like, I think that's one thing we got to look at too with what, you know, Grubb's done at Fresno State and at Washington. Like, Culp and Westover were in a lot of those offensive sets split out in some shape or form at Washington. And so he uses his tight ends a lot in the receiving game, more than what we've seen in the past where they just run flats and outs and corners. Like, he uses them to attack the middle of the field. So I think that's where Fant, you know, Pharaoh Brown, if he's healthy, even AJ Barner are going to be kind of used in, and Brady Russell in those situations. So, all right, this is our 53. I'm okay with this. If this is what Seattle came out with, I'm actually okay with it.
We've really only got them needing to go out and look for one person, and it's a defensive tackle.
Yeah.
We've got 52 of the 53 are currently in camp, and they need to go find a defensive tackle. And I think most people would agree that they need to go find a defensive tackle. When Gotel got hurt and landed on IR, it left them without a backup nose. And Cameron Young never got healthy. Gotel's now gone. They had 3 coming into camp, they thought. Currently, they've got 1, and they need to go find one. So makes a lot of sense.
If they strike out, I have seen some speculation that the Gotel injury might not have been that significant, and that when he's healthy, you know, kind of like we saw last year with a couple of guys like Jonathan Sutherland, that as soon as they get healthy, they could bring him back again if they like him. But yeah, Brady Henderson suggested John Ridgway may be available from the Commanders. And I think that's the type of guy they're going to look for. There's been a lot of speculation. I've seen a lot of articles written about who the guy might be. And there's a lot of like older veterans, like Mike Purcell was cut by the New England Patriots the other day, but he's a veteran nose tackle. He's been reliable, but he's on the wrong side of 30. I don't think that's the profile they're looking for. He says, I think Mike Mack is like that with a lot of guys. He's a perfectionist, which is what makes him such a good coach. There it is. Always asking for more. We haven't talked much about Macdonald. Now that we've seen an entire preseason here, seen a bunch of press conferences, we've seen how he reacts to games and how he deals with the press. How are we feeling about Mike Macdonald? What do you guys think about him just ingratiating himself and settling into that role as head coach?
I think I have been incredibly pleasantly, I don't want to say surprised because I kind of expected it, but I've thought he's checked every box. I mean, his ability to come in and just his attention to detail during camp and his um, there was a culture change that needed to shift where practices were tighter and more detail oriented and all of that, and he did that, and he's done it in a way where the players can't stop talking about all the positive things he does and how much they like coaching for him and how much he's making them better. um Everyone loved Pete, right? For the most part, like especially during camp when he tries to make things fun and energetic and whatever. And for them to have a guy who's not like that, that's gonna be harder on you, and still have everyone be like, no, this guy's awesome. Like to me, that shows a lot about what he's doing. I've been really impressed with everything McDonald's done so far.
Yeah, and I think the big thing about, like you said, Pete and having a good time of practice, I think when Mike comes in, obviously he's got to prove himself a little bit, but I think when players are buying in and they can see this guy's about winning, like you said, the attention to detail is what really stood out to me too. And just listen to the press conferences, and there's always room to get better. And it's not like these blank statements that we sort of were getting used to hearing from Pete, like we're gonna do really good next week just because we are. It's like he's got a lot of reasoning behind it. It just feels like this guy is just dialed in on every little aspect of coaching. And I think the players are. How can you not see that if you're a player down there with them every single day? So I agree. He's checked all the boxes. I think he, like I said, when Bryce and I have been talking about him the last few pods, like he looks the part. Like it feels like he's comfortable. It feels like he's been doing it for 5 or 10 years, even though, he's a young guy. He doesn't look old, but he just looks like he doesn't look like this rookie head coach down there.
The moment's never been too big for him. He seems so comfortable in it. And it's been maybe my favorite part of this entire preseason and off season is watching him grow into the role and embrace it and get comfortable with it. It's like he's born to do this. And it's such a cool approach. And, I hope at some point I stop even comparing the two, but it's kind of inevitable right now. And it will be until we actually start playing games. All the love for Pete Carroll in the world, but sometimes the messaging just gets stale.
Yeah.
And also sometimes the messaging stops working. Things evolve, the game evolves, schemes evolve, players and kids evolve. These kids are coming in more sophisticated now into the league than ever before because they're getting paid now. It's not the culture shock. It's not a big shock to their system to be pros now anymore. They've been pros for the last 3 or 4 years. And so I think a more detail-oriented, business-oriented, teaching-oriented approach is the way to go. And I'm so captivated and fascinated listening to him. I feel like I get smarter every time I hear him talk. I feel like he's laser focused. Like this is what he was born to do. And there's a little bit of Belichick in him in that this is just the focus, right? And he's learned how to deal with the press really comfortably already, even though that's something he didn't do a lot of. The things the players say, they take him seriously, but they also like him. I think that's important. And then we just know that his technical acumen and how much he knows about the game. I think we got a good one, and I can't wait. And I hope it translates. When you think about some of the young coaches that have been hired over the last 5 or 6 years that had all the hype and didn't work out, right? I always think of Brandon Staley, and he might be really smart, and he might be able to wow you on a whiteboard and with his film breakdowns and his X's and O's, but behind the podium, he was a disaster. He won his hiring press conference, and then I don't know what happened after that. Maybe he had a teleprompter that first day, but he couldn't handle the changes that happen and the little adjustments you have to make every single day. And I can't wait to see what this team does on the field because he's just I think we got a good one. I really do.
Well, remember when we were talking about, do you go offensive head coach, defensive head coach, and then it's like. It's so much more than that, though, right? It's like you said, the Staley example is a good one where, he might be great at that aspect, but that doesn't mean he's going to be a leader of 53 men, when to lead them out there. And that's the biggest thing. That's the biggest takeaway. To me, it's like, we know this guy is this young genius on the defensive side of the football. That's great. and it's a huge aspect of why you wanted to bring this guy in for an interview. But there's so much more to him, and I think that, like, we're not even right now in this last few minutes, we haven't even discussed, you know, his defensive schemes. We're talking about Mike Macdonald as the man, as the head coach, the leader of this team, and that's what players are going to see more than anything. Yeah, great, you got these schemes are awesome, and we're excited. But at the end of the day, if that message isn't coming across, if this guy's not respected, that like you said, that's when things become a disaster, like a Staley. And then people are like, what were they thinking hiring this guy? You know what I mean? Because, oh, great, he can cook up some schemes, and but okay, great, that you might be a good coordinator. But we've seen it how many times where that doesn't translate all the time to head coach. Seen it a million times. But with Mike,
it's another good example. You know, really good coordinator just seemed uncomfortable in that role. You know,
And I think with Mike, we're just all confident. Right.
This the skill set for a coordinator and the skill set for a head coach. There's not as much overlap as people want there to be.
Agreed.
Now, players are going to look at a guy that's never been a coordinator, never done anything, and they're going to be like, "Who are you?" And they're not going to listen. So that's why you get the hires from, you know, that group of people. But it's a different skill set. Being good at one doesn't mean you're going to be good at the other. And I think that's kind of missed on a lot of these hires. Like, you know, Staley's like that one. Like, yeah, he's really smart and he can design a defense and he can do those things, but he never did well up in front of people. He didn't represent himself, you know, competently some of the time, and guys are going to take notice of that and they're going to start to tune you out. Macdonald hasn't had that problem at all. He's looked very much in control of every situation. He's just been really impressive. And the fact, like I said, the players keep talking about him in such positive ways, about the way he runs meetings and all of that kind of stuff. It just goes to show you that he's got this team right now.
I'll even go so far as to say this, because one of my biggest concerns, you talked, Ryan, about the concerns early on in the hiring process about, do we go offense or defense? And one of the biggest worries is, if you go with the defensive coach, you hire a really good offensive coordinator, what's going to happen, right? He's going to get a head coaching job. And we're all very excited about Ryan Grubb, and talk about a guy that I feel like I get smarter every time I listen to him talk. I could hear that guy, listen to him talk about offense for hours. If we've already seen some hints of this, if he has a great year, we might not even get to keep him for 2 years, right? Yeah. Like, that guy could go on to be a head coach in the near future. I'm not worried anymore about that happening, because I'm so confident in Mike Macdonald's organizational vision and ability to be organized and and forge connections and evaluate. He will find another guy, and maybe he's already on the roster, and that's Jake Peets, right? But he will find a guy that fits his vision and continue and carry that torch. I don't worry about that anymore.
So this is my, like, kind of little bit on the coaching side of Mike Macdonald is, you got to look at what tree he came out of. And John Schneider's talked about this, how he wanted to be the Baltimore Ravens and what Ozzie Newsome did there and all that. Who didn't Mike Macdonald learn from at every aspect of his coaching career at the professional level and even to the high-end college? The Harbaugh family, Jim and John. And they don't just take on anybody to be coaches with them. And you look especially at John and what he's done in Baltimore. He is a long-tenured head coach, but you never look at John Harbaugh and go, oh, yeah, the message in Baltimore's clearly gotten stale. They're not playing for him anymore. They're not doing – like, he has adapted. They took Lamar Jackson. And the thing that always stands out with me and John Harbaugh is when they were in Seattle, and it was Earl Thomas's first game back in Seattle with the Ravens. And it was 4th and goal, and Lamar Jackson comes over the sideline and says, we're going for it. And John Harbaugh goes, yep, you know what? I trust you. We're going for it, and we're going to go. You never really saw that kind of stuff with Pete. Like, Pete wanted to be so much more in control of it. And when it came to the LOB defense, yeah, he let it go a little bit because they could do special things because there was such elite Hall of Fame talent on that defense that they could make adjustments on the fly amongst them. But just the command, and that was one thing I was watching last night on with the sideline, and like, how does the sideline look to a Pete Carroll sideline? Like, everything looked composed. It didn't matter that they just gave up a huge shot play. Everything was composed. Mike Macdonald didn't freak out. You didn't see him, jumping up. It was just walk, okay, cool, look at my sheet, talk to whoever, and boom. And, the other thing I was going to say too with Mike Macdonald, you can already see it kind of paying off. And I talked on the 12 Talk podcast earlier today about this, is you look at the Titans game. He didn't call the defense at any point in that game. The first half was Andre Durde. The second half was Carl Scott. And there was one thing that stood out to me like crazy. And I've watched that game 4 or 5 times now. You could see that Andre Durde has bought into Mike Macdonald's style of defense. They pressured. They did all that stuff in the first half. You could see Carl Scott's side come out, and they were off. They were playing off kind of like in Pete Carroll, and guys were running open. Like you look at that final couple of drives there for the Titans when they moved the ball. Yeah. It was like, well, I was watching, like guys were catching the ball, no one was around them. But the first half, that wasn't the case. And I know there were 3s and 4s and so on, but you could see the stylistical change of calling a game at that point, and maybe why he went out and picked Andre Durde to be his defensive coordinator. It was like, hey, this is a guy that shares that same vision as me. And Carl Scott is the only holdover from the Pete Carroll era at all.
Yeah.
So, no, I think they got the right guy with Mike Macdonald, and I think and the other guy that I don't think gets talked about enough is Leslie Frazier. I think he has had such an impact on Mike Macdonald and this organizational vision, how to handle things, how to handle the press, what to do, what not to say, how to handle the guys. I think Leslie Frazier is invaluable to the Seahawk franchise with Mike Macdonald here. And it looks very similar to what the Rams did when they got McVay. They brought in Wade Phillips. Mm-hmm. Here's your veteran head coach that's done it before. This is what you do. This is what you don't do. This is how we're going to go forward. So
I'm not sure. I did want to mention this, though. I think that's such a great point you make about Macdonald's lineage and his history, because isn't John Harbaugh the best example of kind of what I was talking about earlier? Like that dude was a special teams coach. I don't even know if today he could get on a whiteboard and draw up defensive schemes for you or offensive schemes. But what he's done from day one and what has made him such a good head coach is communication with players, teaching, and his organizational ability, right? His ability to manage a staff, to manage the managers and get the most out of players that way, and keep the message fresh and evaluate and understand hiring good coaches. I think that, it's Macdonald, I think, is one of those rare guys that just is the whole package. He has all.
Yeah, I will say this too. I've thought the same thing when, we've been in the offseason talking about Mike Mack and just how confident we are with him. And the whole thing about, oh, shoot, if you go defensive head coach, you're going to lose your OC quicker than if you went the other way around. But, okay, if you hope this offense balls out, Ryan Grubb, if he gets a head coaching job in a couple of years, 2-3 years, whatever it is, I am 100% agreeing with you. It starts with Mike, and you are 100% confident that he's going to go get another good guy, because look at what he did when he came over here. He didn't bring a whole coaching staff of Baltimore Ravens, right? So he went out and recruited this guy, Ryan Grubb. He saw something in him that he says that this guy can work with this team. And so that's exactly what you want. And you look at, not to harp back on Pete, but his track record hasn't been great with the coordinators that he continuously would bring in, right? And so
develop any head coaches. I mean, after
right, and that's not a good thing.
Yeah, Dan Quinn and Gus Bradley. Yeah, and that was it. Although, I mean, you have to give him credit for Dave Canales, and actually, I wasn't that high on him as a candidate, but it looks like, gosh, the early signs at Carolina are pretty promising. But in 15 years. 3 guys that doesn't bode really, really well. I suspect that Macdonald's going to be one of those guys that if he's here 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, there's a coaching tree, and guys are going to go on and become head coaches.
Yeah. And Bryce, real quick, to your point, when I was listening to your point about, I think you were saying how composed he is in the sideline, and that's a great thing. I'm gonna give him a little time to see if anything happens throughout the year. But the one guy you talk about, the tree, Jim there he's been known to freak out a few times on the sideline and still be successful. So it's just kind of how you go about it. Everyone's got their own brand. I do like the calm and cool demeanor that Mike poses, and not too high, not too low. So but you know what? It's just finishing up touching on Mike too. I just, and who knows how we'll do, but you just feel like you got your guy now in this division going when you play the Niners, when you play the Rams, McVay against McDonald, Shanahan against McDonald. That gets me excited there when we're going to play these divisional games.
Yeah.
So
looks like we've lost Keith, guys, but I have.
Oh yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, no, actually,
he did
Keith,
say
Keith had to leave. Probably missed. So yeah, guys. Anyway,
we've got a solution.
Shout out to Keith Myers for coming in and joining us on this live pod. We always love having Keith on from the Seahawks Playbook. So guys, if you've been listening in on this live stream and you haven't went over to those guys' channels yet, go over to the Seahawks Playbook and give them a sub. Because they do awesome work.
Thank you for reminding me. I wanted to say that too, because I'm also live streaming this on my channels. And so a bunch of my viewers are here. If you guys haven't gone over to Bryce and Ryan's podcast yet, the Hawk Zone Rundown, get your ass over there and give them a subscription. They're closing in on 1,000 subscriptions. That's a big deal in the YouTube world. You get to 1,000 and it just really helps elevate your channel. So if you haven't done it yet, get the hell over there and subscribe to these guys. One defensive tackle, all their edge rushers. I mean, like I said earlier, Miles Adams playing defensive tackle. Like, they've held back so much. They gave us a glimpse, just enough for us to see that, hey, we have something to look forward to here. But, we saw very little of Jonathan Hankins. We really saw very little Byron Murphy. I bet in a vacuum, Macdonald probably would have loved to have played Murphy a ton. And in the old days, we would have. But the preseason has changed so much. I kind of hate it. I mean, I had a good time last night, got to hang out with Bryce, but also it was one of the most entertaining preseason games we've seen in a long time. I think because of the newfound intensity and
with points scored.
And there were big plays. But I also find myself watching preseason games like this now. Just don't get hurt. Just don't get hurt. I have come full circle now. I think they should just get rid of the whole damn thing, like college football, and just have joint practices or whatever you want to do, and then just head into the regular season. But beside my point, like they have shown us so little. We have not seen the full game plan with full personnel on the field yet, and yet we still have so much that we have. We're 2 hours into talking about all the things we like about what we've seen so far, and yet he's shown us like it's iceberg, right? It's the 10% tip of the iceberg on the top of the water, and we haven't even seen what's underneath yet.
I would love to address this point. I've literally just been raised here. So the whole not playing starters, it's preseason. You could play in the regular season and people still get injured. It doesn't matter. It's a contact sport. It doesn't matter when people play or who you're playing against. There's always a possibility of injury. So you can play first string, second string, third string. You could play against a UFL team. Someone could get injured. I completely appreciate what people are saying, but as a sports coach, as an ex-player of a contact sport, it doesn't matter who you play. There's going to be injuries, and I understand trying to protect people, keeping in that protective bubble of not playing them. But if you do that, they're not ready for the season, in my opinion. You need to play a contact, active game to have someone ready to play in the regular season. Because if you're playing against your teammates, your friends in practice, that's cool, but you're not going to hit them in the face. You're not going to try and embarrass them with a dot from, say, someone like Gino. But the injuries are going to happen regardless, whether it's the first game, the 17th game, the playoffs, it's going to happen. So in my opinion, it should be a matter of just trying to ease them in, get everyone used to that contact, because as Bryce will probably tell you, as a coach as well, if you don't train contact, your body is not conditioned to it. So these guys need to be in there. They need to be playing against people that will hit them full frontal in the face. If you don't play them, then you come into the regular season, you'll get hit once and your body's not used to it. Yeah. So you'll always have those injuries. It's a huge sliding scale. It's a massive contradiction in itself, but you want to protect them, but you need to play them.
It's tough because when you look at just pull the Aaron Rodgers example, gets what first series or whatever. But if
on the first drive, wasn't it?
I mean, but what do people say? that happens, right? But if it would have happened in a preseason game, the Jets would have got roasted and killed.
Yeah.
The fact that they had their starter out there and he blew his Achilles, and they'd be like, why is he there? He does not need to be there. And that's not to say, to your point, that that it wouldn't have still happened, because it did. But at least it's more, I think, to the average fan and the front office, that it's a little more acceptable, because like you said, injuries are part of the game. That if it happens in the regular season, we can accept it a little more, because these games, and I agree, because listen, I'm not a big betting dude, but I wouldn't gamble on the first week of the season, because to your point, everyone's not fired on all cylinders. It takes a few weeks to get dialed in, and a big reason is because you don't play. But I just think we're at this point that, like you said, Dan, you're holding your breath. When Chenna with the sprain, you're holding your breath. And then if he went out for the year, you'd be like, man, why did we play that guy? He was injured last year. Like, just sit him. Like, let him come in week 1. He's been practicing. We're good. And I'm sort of in that boat. Like, Josh, I get your point, but I'm also think we're at this point. The money's so big. These guys are like DK. He showed us, hey, we know DK can go run a fade route and an out route, but you just saw the coaching on display more than anything. We know DK can do that. So take your helmet off, hit the shower after that. We're good. What are we expecting out of the Seahawks this season, guys? Like, win totals. I mean, it's time for win totals. We are done preseason. Dan, you want to go first?
I said 2 or 3 weeks ago that it feels like an 11-win team. And that was even before we've seen everything we've seen to this point. And that was just based on the quality of the roster that I thought, the young talent spread throughout the roster, and what I was seeing from this coaching staff, seeing and hearing from this coaching staff. That, forget about the schedule. People like to look at the schedule and they like to try and go game by game and pick it. But it's almost impossible to do that and detach yourself from preconceived notions or recency bias of what you think teams were. We don't know until you get on the field. I feel like this staff and this roster, that there are games we wouldn't have won over the last 7-8 years that they will now win. They will find a way. They will be more adaptable within a game. They will go into each week with a better game plan tailored towards that team, instead of just, we're going to run what we run and try to execute it as best we can. I think they're going to be more creative. I think they're going to teach better. Execution's going to be better. And we're going to win some games that I think when we get into the season, there are going to be shows we do. We're going to talk to each other and we're going to go, I don't think we win that game last year or the year before. And then you look around the division and it's not great right now. I mean, I know the Cardinals are feeling good about themselves because they're like the new darling, but even Darius Robinson's going to be out for a significant amount of time now. Their defense has major question marks. I've never been a Kyler Murray guy. And even if he is healthy this year and he plays like he did the last half of last season, it was more as kind of a game manager, sort of a point guard type guy.
Don't say that. I've just drafted him in fantasy.
Right. I mean, hey, being a good fantasy quarterback doesn't necessarily mean you're a good quarterback, right? I just mean he's not a guy that scares me as I'm preparing for him with the Seahawks. You look at the Niners and all the things they're dealing with, and not set the contract stuff aside. Like, their entire defensive line outside of Nick Bosa is banged up. All the guys they brought in this year to make up for some of the free agent losses are banged up. They've got injuries. They've got Greenlaw's out and Hufanga's out. And their offensive line is in tatters right now. Brock Purdy hasn't played well in the preseason. The Rams, as much as I thought what they did on the offensive line in the offseason was going to set them up to be a really dynamic offense, they got nothing but injury issues up front there. Now the Ernest Jones thing. They've named Stetson Bennett as their backup quarterback now, to a guy who is proven that he has some injury issues. If Matt Stafford goes down, do you fear facing the Rams with Stetson Bennett at quarterback? Like, suddenly this division doesn't look as daunting. And I just feel really good about this staff. And I know it's easy to feel good right now, but I think there's enough evidence to warrant it.
So go on, give us a number.
I think they win 11. I do.
Okay.
I do.
Nice. Yeah, I like it.
I think they think they're going to win 11.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah,
I think they're going to find a way to do
I
it.
think they're really confident going into this season. I think they might even think they're going to be more. But yeah, I like that number a lot. Bryce, what are you thinking?
So I looked at it this way. When we first started this offseason, going through the hiring process and everything, I thought, okay, if Pete's back, we're going to win 9. That's our cap. That's what it is right now. Maybe we squeak one more game if somehow it goes right. But I was thinking we were 9 wins max. I think there's a good chance this team could get to 12.
Ooh,
I think they could go 12 and 5, because now that I've seen some of this product on the field, how they play, how this scheme starting to show up, I look at before when I looked at the schedule and went, ooh, Miami, I don't know if we can beat Miami because of their high-powered offense. I think we could beat Miami and blow them out of the water, theoretically, where we shut down their high-flying offense because Tua's under pressure and he can't get the ball deep to Tyreek Hill. And our offense is too much for their defense to handle. Like, that's the thing that I came out of that preseason game with going, this is probably one of the very few years I've looked at a Seahawks team where they're not even a completely finished product, but they complement each side of the ball so well, where we have a defense that could be suffocating and dominant, and at the same time end up, having a situation where they have a rough week and our offense goes off. Like, we're not in a situation where, like, when the Legion of Boom used to fail or struggle, our offense struggled to gain, even with Russell in his prime, gain some traction and win some of those games unless they were against a really weak opponent. I feel like now we're in a situation where it's like, yeah, you know what? If we have a day where our defense has a bad day, our offense could still put up 37 points if they needed to and play in that kind of a shootout situation.
Josh.
I'm exactly the same as Dan. I think it's going to be 11-6 season. I think it's going to be.
Is that metric or standard wins?
That's right. Bully the Brit. It's fine. I think there's like you said, I think the division is like San Francisco. The 49ers are a McCaffrey injury away from having not a lot, because we've seen Debo in preseason. He's not offered much to them. Brock Purdy's looked awful in preseason. The Cardinals are still trying to build. The Rams somehow seem to be steady, even though Stafford's neck is held on by a shoestring. Looking at the whole schedule, I think 11-6 is very realistic. I'd, depending on what day I feel, I think 10-7, 11-6. The optimist in me thinks 11-6, but I sort of move between the two. I think it's all going to depend on that mid-season point where our defense actually starts really clicking and knowing what to do and where they need to go. If we do that by game 6, game 7, let's say, I think that's where we slide to the 11 win. If we don't get the Mike Mac defense down properly, I think it's going to be a 10-9 win. But I genuinely think with the coaches we've got, with the players we've got who know how to play football essentially and what they need to do. So you Rayshard Jenkins, if he comes in fully fit by game 3 or 4, I think we'll definitely be 11-win team. So I'm going 11-6. Yeah. I put it on our pod, like the way too early predictions a while ago, and I'm going to stick with it. 11-6. There you go.
Nice. Yeah. Well, Chris Clough chiming in. He thinks it's a tough schedule for 11 wins. I mean, number 12 toughest schedule based on 2023. Need O-line. I mean, that's going to be a big question mark for sure. I mean, the one thing about the schedule, I guess the one thing people look at, we don't have that gauntlet, quote unquote, like last year that was like, whoa. Yeah. So I think when you look at this schedule, you kind of look like, do we have a gauntlet? No. Okay, we're pretty good. I mean, he's right though. There's going to be a lot of tough games, a lot of tough matchups, and you got to play the Rams and Niners. I know we're saying that don't look as good. Purdy doesn't look good, all this kind of stuff. But what do we love so much about this squad this year? Mike Mac. What do those teams have? Really good head coaches. We also thought the Rams weren't going to be any good last year, and then they made the playoffs, and then you're like, yeah, Sean McVay still knows what he's doing, and I just think and that's part of the schedule, Rams and Niners, until those guys really part ways from those teams. I think you're always going to look at somewhat competitive teams, maybe not Super Bowl contending like the Niners will be every season, but they have proven to be great coaches. And I think we now feel like we potentially could have our own version of that. And now people could potentially look at the Seahawks like that for some years to come, and that's what I'm hoping. I mean, I'm in agreement with you guys. I got them around 11, and I just, a lot of it is talent based, and now that with these coaches, we're confident that they could put them in the best positions to succeed. Carroll was able to pull 9 wins out of these guys, and at times it looked like a disaster. They couldn't stop the run to save their life. The offense was, even though on paper they looked okay, it was super stale. Still won 9 games, almost made the playoffs. So I think when you look at that, if you believe in this coaching staff and you think Mike's going to take that next step, and obviously a foundational year, but still they're obviously proven that they want to compete. So I agree. I'm around that. If things are, I'm around that 11. I think we could do that. It's going to be tough, but I think it's doable.
I love that Bryce is like biting his nails and like holding his lip.
Oh no, I just have a surprise for everybody in about probably a minute here. So
okay, go.
We'll see here. So just hold on a minute here.
And just guys, heads up, I'm going to be exiting soon here on the live stream. But I think that sort of segues into his surprise.
Yeah, my surprise is coming here, guys, for everybody. So we've got another guest that's actually going to quickly join us here to kind of help out with the 4 squares we've got going here. But guys, the one thing I'll say about this Seahawks team is I don't have as many, kind of like when I look at our divisional games against the Cardinals and the Rams and the Niners, I used to dread them. Now I'm excited for them again, where I'm actually like, yeah, I can't wait to take on the Niners. I can't wait to take on the Rams. I'm not going, oh God, this is going to be a problem. And there's my surprise for everybody. Hello, Chris.
Hey, Chris Clough, guys.
Hey, guys. What's up, buddy?
I've been lurking and just listening to you guys. So
lurking in the comments.
Nice to meet you, Josh.
Yeah, we figured.
You too.
We figured we better just get you on here.
Yeah, you've been asking the best questions basically in the group, the most detailed ones. So we figured, why not throw Chris on here so we can answer some more of our guest ones as well when he come on.
Well, Chris, no, it's awesome you coming on here, guys. Just for everyone watching the show, Chris Clough's been on the show with us a few times, and he's awesome to have on the show. So it's awesome that you could join us and keep this conversation rolling along here.
I think it's fitting. If I remember correctly, I think Chris, it was you that put us all together. You reached out to me and said, "Hey, I got these guys that I know that are doing this really cool thing in Canada, and they'd love it." And you put us together in the first place, and now we've done a whole bunch of content together. So yeah,
I trust Mike to be able to adapt and address issues when the team is struggling. It will at some point. I had completely lost trust in Pete's ability to do that. I completely agree with that statement. Like I completely lost that as well.
Yeah. It seemed like the last couple of years, especially last year, that he was grasping for answers. We would hear him on his Monday coaches show after a bad game talk about, well, we're looking at this, we're looking at that, we're going to try this, we're going to try that. I would expect if and when, because it'll happen at some point, we reach a rough patch or we lose a game we should have won, or there's a poor defensive performance. I think what we're going to see from Mike Macdonald, based on what we've heard so far, is we know what we're going to do, and it would involve that guy's not going to get as many reps anymore. That guy can't get it done. This is not a package that we can use right now because we don't have the guys to get it done. Where it just seemed like Pete in the last couple of years was sort of grasping at straws, trying to find the answers. I do think that's one of the things that gives me confidence. He's going to be able to figure out with this roster and this group of talent, week in, week out, how to plan week to week, because it'll be different. It's going to be more Belichick-like in that we're going to see different game plans from week to week that are going to be much more dramatic than we saw under Pete.
No, I totally agree with that. You're going to see more scheming. You're going to see the offense and defense. Like you can tell with, Grubb, he's doing the same thing. He's like, I don't think it's my imagination that this year's defense tackles roughly 100 times better than last year's. Dave, I would say it probably tackles better than the last 5 years with the Seahawks defenses. Like there's always somebody around the ball, and the guy goes down within 1 or 2 hits. Like he's either down right away or it's 2 guys are taking him to the ground. Like that was one thing I noticed last night was how often like DJ James or one of the young guys is like around the ball. There's nobody there were a couple moments, but there's not a whole bunch of guys running by themselves for 15 yards. Like there were a few moments, but not as much. And like the minute the ball's in play, like there was one where Jameis Winston on the first drive took off running, and I watched Byron Murphy literally chase his ass to the sideline and was there with Artie Burns to push him out of bounds. And I'm like, that is a big man, but he was just moving.
He was shifting. Yeah. And I think the defensive line, depending on what we run, if we go 3-4, 4-3, bare front, where Mike Mac tends to run 7 at the line and then shift them, I think you're probably going to see a lot of the outside linebackers moving inside as well. This is where it's so difficult for anyone who's not inside the organization to see, where we don't know who's going where, who's going to play in what position. It's going to be intriguing for absolutely every 12 to see.
Yeah, and you think about week 1, right? And Nwosu being out and concerns about, depth at the edge and even at defensive tackle. And with what we know about Sean Payton and picturing the way that he ran that offense in New Orleans, the Drew Brees and Alvin Kamara and all those guys, it wasn't a power running game, right? And so Mike Macdonald's answer to some of those guys being out week 1 might be they just play a ton of nickel and dime, right? And
I'd love dime packages for us.
We have an extra safety, and it's I'm not that worried about it because I think they'll have answers.
Yeah, that kind of answers this question right here about the injuries. Yes, they're not great, but if Chenna isn't done for the year, I'm okay. Yeah. Guys, I really want to say thanks for coming on. It's been, 3 hours. We've been talking Hawks. Josh has been in and out of the comments section. I've been talking Hawks basically now for 5 hours, so it's been a lot. But I'm just going to go around. You guys can plug your stuff for where people can find you, what you guys got coming up in the next couple weeks here leading into week 1 of the regular season. So I'll start with you, Dan. What's going on the Seahawks Forever show?
We're heading into week 0, right? So obviously we'll be all over the next couple of days, cuts and any trades or any interesting acquisitions, and just trying to stay on top of that. And then practice squad. That's always fun to kind of watch that be filled out. We'll keep our eye on injury news, certainly. And then I've got a couple of guests, a couple of, great local journalists who cover the team that I'll kind of keep under wraps for now that have agreed to come on the show during that period. So, just really trying to set the stage for what we think we're going to see in the regular season, and then get a little bit more specific and, after next week and just start to focus on the Denver Broncos and get into the season and the routine of the season and previewing each game, try to have somebody on that covers the other team or does content creation for them each week, and then breaking it down afterwards, live reaction shows after the games, and trying to get into some film breakdowns as well. So that's what I've got coming on.
Josh, you guys down over there on the other side of the pond from us?
Yeah, so we're a 12 Talk podcast. We're a UK-based Seahawks podcast. We are by 12s, 4-12s, with 12s. Our whole ethos for the whole season is to have as many 12s as possible come on and talk post-game, pre-game. We've got some amazing guests coming up. Obviously, we've had Dan on, and he was amazing. So
thank you, sir.
Do it again.
Got to get you on this way.
Yeah, yes. We've just had Bryce on, and it was an amazing pod. We've got some amazing content creators. We've got some 12s from all around the world that are going to come and review games with us. And it's going to be an amazing season for us as a newer Seahawks pod. We're so proud of what we're doing. We're now the official UK Seahawkers pod. Nice. And it's just we're growing. We're growing a community. We've got a Discord. We're all over social media. But yeah, I just want to say thank you to everyone that's tuned in with this, tuned in with Ryan and Bryce. These guys do an amazing job. Dan, you're one of my favorite podcasters. You get me through my drives for work.
Agreed.
Thank you very much, sir.
Appreciate both you guys. And for those of you watching, because I'm also streaming this on my channel again, head over to the 12 Talk podcast and the Hawk Zone Rundown podcast. Give those guys a subscription. They're great Seahawks and producing some great content. I got some breaking news, guys. As we mentioned earlier, the Commanders and Patriots are playing right now. Jacoby Brissett exited the game 2 minutes in after getting sacked. He's injured. No details yet on just how severe it is. Drake May is in the game now and leading a drive, and people are already saying that this may be kind of the final piece of information that we need to see that will lead the Patriots to naming May as the starter. So the Seahawks might be facing a real possibility of 2 rookie quarterbacks weeks 1 and 2.
Oh, I just saw the video of Brissett getting hit there, Dan.
He got munched.
He got munched. I wouldn't be shocked if it's not a shoulder injury by the looks of that. But, again, thank you to all of our viewers and listeners that were tuned into this episode. Really appreciate the comments, guys. For the Hawk Zone Rundown, we're going to be doing post and preview shows every week for the leading up to the season. And we're also going to have, Josh and Mitch on from 12 Talk. We'll have Dan on. We love having Dan on throughout the season and do some collabs there. And, we've got a couple cool things coming up, like Ryan alluded to. We've got merch that will be dropping week 1. So you guys will be able to order hats, T-shirts, hoodies. And
unless you're in the UK.
Yes. And we've got ultimate logos that we've designed for this. So it's not just going to be our OG logo. Dan's had the luxury of seeing what some of the logos look like. I'll make sure to send them over to you, Josh, as well, so you can kind of get a peek of what those look like. But thanks again, everybody, for tuning in. And I'll just end it out with Go Hawks.
Go Hawks. Thanks, you guys.